When a woman withdraws into mystery, a man's ego shatters. Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why a man can be surrounded by beauty, affection, and attention, yet still find his thoughts drawn to the woman who moved away from him without explanation? Not in anger, not in punishment, but in an almost sacred retreat into herself. It is because such a withdrawal is not an absence, it is a mirror. In the sudden quiet she leaves behind, he is forced to face himself, and for many men, that is far more terrifying than losing her. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the unseen parts of the self that we deny, bury, or fear. When a woman steps back into mystery, she does more than create distance. She pulls the curtain from the man's shadow and shows him the truth of his own reflection. In her presence, he may have ignored his flaws, soothed his doubts with her constant availability, or disguised his insecurities behind the illusion of control. But once she is gone, his ego finds itself without the scaffolding her attention provided. To understand the power of her withdrawal, you must see it not as an act of cruelty, but as an instinct for survival. The feminine spirit, when aligned with its truth, will not remain where it is unseen or undervalued. She senses when her energy is being consumed rather than honored, and instead of explaining or defending herself, she simply returns to her own depths. This is not running away, it is returning home. And here is where the fracture in the masculine ego begins. Men often imagine they can predict a woman's emotional movements, that she will argue, that she will plead, that she will try to prove her worth. These are the patterns they prepare for. But when she does none of these things, when she vanishes without accusation, she removes the game entirely. His prepared defenses have nothing to fight against. And in the absence of a battle, he is left only with himself. Mystery is not an act, it is a state of being. When she enters it, she is not attempting to manipulate or provoke, she is reclaiming her own soul. Jung would say she is engaging in individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the unclaimed pieces of herself. And in this space, her value no longer comes from how she's perceived by him, but from the quiet knowing of who she is. This shift is devastating to the ego that once believed her identity revolved around his presence. For a man, the shattering of ego often feels like heartbreak. But it is deeper than that. Heartbreak grieves the loss of another person. Ego collapse grieves the loss of self-image. He begins to question why she withdrew. Was it something he did? Something he didn't do? Was it her all along? Or was it him? These questions spiral, and with no answers from her lips, his mind becomes the only battlefield. The truth is, she has no obligation to answer them. A woman's withdrawal is not an invitation for interrogation. It is a sacred boundary, a signal that the journey she's on is hers alone. And for the first time, he must wrestle with the reality that he is no longer the center of her world. He may have been a chapter, a lesson, a mirror, but he is no longer her axis. In this, there's a subtle but undeniable power. The less she reveals, the more he projects. And projection, Jung reminds us, is never about the other person, it is the shadow speaking. He may paint her in colors she never wore, imagine motives she never held, or cast her as the villain in a story she never wrote. All of it is the ego's desperate attempt to shield itself from the wound of not being chosen. Yet this is precisely why the woman in her mystery holds such gravitational pull. She's not feeding the ego with reassurances. She's not offering him a way to save face. She's not smoothing over the truth so he can feel comfortable. She's allowing him to feel the full weight of his own emptiness, and in that raw silence, she becomes unforgettable. The most dangerous woman is not the one who fights to stay, it is the one who leaves without needing to prove anything. For she does not move out of spite, but out of alignment. And when she retreats into mystery, she does not take herself away from him, she takes him away from himself, from the illusions that once kept his ego intact. This is why her absence burns longer than her presence ever could. It is not because she left. It is because in leaving, she revealed the fragile architecture of the identity he had built around her. And when a man sees himself without the scaffolding of admiration, attention, and constant affirmation, The mirror can be too much to bear. Her absence begins as a faint echo, a quiet gap in its daily rhythm. But as days turn to weeks, the stillness grows louder. Every unanswered question, every unreturned call, every memory that surfaces uninvited, it all gathers weight. The human mind does not cope well with voids. It seeks to fill them. And so his imagination begins to paint her in richer colors than reality ever could, turning her into something almost mythic. Jung wrote that the anima man's inner feminine is the bridge to his unconscious. When she withdraws, she takes that bridge with her, leaving him stranded on the familiar shores of his own mind. At first, he may resist this isolation, drowning himself in distraction, new faces, constant noise, unending work. But the bridge is gone, and without it, the inner landscapes that once came alive in her presence now lie dark and inaccessible. This is where the shattering begins in earnest. His ego, which once stood tall on the belief that he could hold her attention indefinitely, now finds itself crumbling under the weight of her indifference. Indifference is not cruelty, it is the absence of dependence. She does not need to diminish him, because her withdrawal was never about punishment. It was about preservation. She has entered the terrain of mystery because it is where she breathes freely. For a man unaccustomed to this depth, her silence feels like abandonment. But to her, it is rebirth. In retreat, she hears the sound of her own thoughts again. She feels the return of her own heartbeat, no longer pacing itself to match his. She moves without needing to explain her every step, and this freedom sharpens her presence in ways that will linger in his mind long after she is gone. The more he tries to summon her back into the light of his control, the deeper she slips into the shadows of her own making. This is a paradox of the feminine in her power. When pursued without respect for her space, she becomes even more elusive. It is not a performance, it is instinct. Like water withdrawing from the shore to gather itself into a stronger tide, she retreats to return to herself. In Stoic philosophy, the strength of a person is measured by their ability to be unmoved by the external. She now embodies this. His moods do not dictate her day. His approval does not crown her worth. His disapproval does not shake her ground. And the more unshaken she becomes, the more the fragile architecture of his ego is exposed. For the male ego, mystery is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it ignites the chase, the curiosity to know what she is thinking, feeling, or doing. On the other, it reveals his own insecurities when he cannot access those answers. In the space she has created, he begins to see the parts of himself he had long ignored: the need for control, the fear of irrelevance, the belief that affection must be constant to be real. Meanwhile, she is no longer tethered to his perception. In her private world, she is integrating what Jung called the shadow, her own hidden fears, desires, and strengths. This is not time spent plotting his downfall or rehearsing what she would say if they met again. It is time spent refining her essence, shedding the layers she once wore to keep the peace, to please, to be chosen. She has chosen herself, and this choice radiates in ways that words cannot capture. He feels it even from afar. It is there in the way her absence changes the air when her name is mentioned. It is in the silence of his phone when he expects her reply and it never comes. It is in the way his new experiences fail to dull the sharp outline of her memory. The more he tries to replace her, the clearer it becomes he is not missing her presence as much as he is missing the version of himself he felt in her company. This is why her withdrawal shatters him, not because she was cruel, but because she was the mirror in which he once saw his best reflection. And now, with that mirror gone, he must look directly into the unpolished glass of who he truly is. There is a certain cruelty in mirrors that tell the truth, though it is never intentional. Her mystery is that mirror now, and each day without her becomes another lesson he didn't ask for but cannot ignore. Without the validation of her eyes on him, without the steady rhythm of her energy in his life, he begins to feel the cracks in his own identity widening. In Jungian terms, what is breaking is not love, it is the persona, the mask he built to face the world. That mask worked well when she was there, reflecting back what he wanted to see. But her retreat into mystery strips the paint from the facade. He begins to recognize that much of his confidence depended not on who he truly is, but on how she responded to him. When the response is gone, the scaffolding collapses. She does not witness this collapse. She is too far inside her own world. The feminine spirit in mystery does not hover to measure the effect of her absence. She is busy with her own shadow work, integrating wounds, reclaiming lost parts of herself, and letting go of any identity that was shaped by another's approval. It is a sacred withdrawal, one that reshapes her without requiring the world to understand. The man, however, feels the reshaping from the outside. In her absence, the traits that once made her familiar now feel untouchable. He cannot reach her laughter, her warmth, her quiet reassurance. And because the mind is both a storyteller and a prisoner of longing, he begins to rewrite their history in 1,000 ways, imagining what he would have said, what he should have done, the moments when he might have changed the ending. But the ending was not sudden. It began long before she withdrew physically. Mystery often starts as a soft veil, small silences, pauses in conversation, the way she no longer rushes to explain herself. These shifts are subtle, almost invisible to the distracted eye. Yet to a man attuned to control, they are deeply unsettling. Because the moment a woman starts holding parts of herself back, she signals that her inner life is not for him to access at will. The masculine ego has always been both drawn to and threatened by what it cannot fully understand. This is why mystery is magnetic. It promises depth but resists possession. The more she embodies it, the more he circles around it, hoping to decipher her. Yet in doing so, he only exposes the fragility of his own need to know, to define, to own. She, on the other hand, is learning to exist without being seen in a certain light. She no longer curates herself for his gaze. Her time is spent in solitude that is not loneliness but sanctuary. She may walk along a beach alone, or sit in a cafe with a book, or close her door to the world for days, not because she is avoiding him, but because she is embracing herself. In those moments, she reconnects with the parts of her that existed before he ever arrived. And here lies the deepest truth. Her withdrawal is not designed to break him, but it does. It breaks the version of him that depended on her presence to feel important. It breaks the story he told himself about being the axis around which her life turned. It breaks the illusion that affection, once given, is guaranteed forever. The shattering is not immediate, it is slow, like ice fracturing under the weight of spring. One day he still believes she might return. The next, he realizes she already has only she returned to herself, not to him. And that is the moment the ego understands the difference between losing a person and losing the hold over them. What remains is the echo of her presence, sharp, soft, impossible to erase. It lives in the scent of a place they once visited, the sound of a song that played in the background of their time together, the feeling of a season that reminds him of her skin. These are the hauntings that mystery leaves behind, not loud, not obvious, but permanent. It is in this space, after her absence has hardened into permanence, that his mind becomes its own tormentor. A man can fight an enemy he can see, he cannot fight the invisible. Her silence has no edges, no weakness to attack, no crack through which to force his way back in. This is why mystery is more powerful than confrontation. It gives him nothing to push against, only himself. Jung wrote that what we reject in others is often what we cannot face in ourselves. Her withdrawal, to him, feels like rejection. But beneath that, it is a mirror reflecting his own neglected depths. The discomfort is not just about losing her, it is about meeting the parts of himself he has kept in the shadows. Insecurity, dependency, unprocessed grief, the fear of being unseen. When she was present, those shadows had no stage. Her attention acted like a light, erasing them. But now, with that light gone, the shadows swell and take form. He notices his need for affirmation, the subtle ways he engineered her praise, the unspoken expectation that she would tend to his ego. Without her, he must become the caretaker of his own worth, and this is a task many men never learn until the woman they leaned on has vanished into herself. Meanwhile, she moves in rhythms he can no longer predict. She is not trying to be elusive, she simply is. Her time is not punctuated by his calls or tethered to his moods. She has become sovereign in her own orbit, answering only to the quiet compass of her inner life. There is a calm power in this, the kind that does not announce itself yet, cannot be ignored. If he were able to see clearly, he might notice that this sovereignty is not an act of cruelty, but an act of preservation. To withdraw into mystery is to create a sacred space where the self can breathe without performance. But to a man still wrapped in the armor of his ego, it feels like exile. And in exile, the mind wanders through strange landscapes, memory, fantasy, regret, searching for the gates back in. It is here that longing becomes obsession. He replays old conversations, decoding pauses and inflection. He scrolls through images of her, not just to remember, but to feel something real in the midst of her absence. He imagines scenarios in which they meet again, where the right words at the right time undo the distance. Yet each imagined reunion only deepens the truth. The woman he is reaching for is no longer the one who left. Because when the woman withdraws into mystery, she does not remain frozen in the shape he remembers. She evolves. Her solitude refines her. The energies she once poured into sustaining him are redirected inward into her work, her passions, her healing. This transformation is not theatrical. It is quiet and irreversible. And the man, sensing this, feels the weight of what he has lost. Not just her, but the version of himself that existed when she still offered him her trust. The ego struggles here because it cannot accept that it was never entitled to her inner world. It must reckon with the truth that intimacy is a gift, not a possession. For her, the silence is fertile ground. For him, it is a labyrinth with no map. He can pace the corridors endlessly, touching the cold walls of her absence. But he will not find the center, because the center is no longer his to reach. She has taken it with her, and in doing so, she has reminded him of something he may spend years resisting, that no one is owed access to another's soul. And so the haunting continues, not through malice, but through the permanence of what was once shared and can never be repeated. This is the paradox of mystery. It is both a presence and an absence. A force that draws the mind back again and again while remaining forever out of reach. Over time, the man's mind quiets, not because he has conquered the mystery, but because he has learned to live with it. Her absence becomes less of a wound and more of a distant coastline, something he can see but not set foot on. And in this new stillness, he begins to understand her withdrawal was never about punishing him. It was about reclaiming herself. She, too, has changed. The woman who once needed to explain, to justify, to prove, now moves without those weights. She walks lighter because she is no longer carrying the burden of someone else's ego. Her silence has taught her the language of her own soul, and it speaks in a voice far more compelling than any external approval. The detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. She no longer lives in reaction to his actions or in fear of his absence. Her worth is no longer a mirror reflecting his validation. Instead, it is an anchor sunk deep in the waters of her own being. Mystery has become her ally. It protects her from those who seek to consume without giving. It reminds her that she is not here to be fully known by everyone, only by those who have earned the privilege of her openness. The rest can wonder. The rest can imagine. The rest can live with the haunting of never fully possessing what was never theirs to claim. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." In withdrawing, she stepped into that privilege. She stopped offering explanations and started offering presence on her terms, in her time, with those who could meet her without needing to diminish her to feel tall. And now, she chooses differently. She no longer waits for calls, no longer listens for the footsteps of someone returning from a place they should never have wandered. She lives in the present, untethered from old stories, free from the endless work of holding together what was built on fragile ground. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. And